All right, good afternoon and welcome to the afternoon session of the Landmarks Preservation Commission's public hearing and public meeting of August 15th. We are in the process of going through our public meeting agenda for items that have already had a public hearing and are back today with revisions. And this meeting is being held in person at our hearing room at 1 Center Street. It is also being held via Zoom so that the public can participate. And we have two commissioners participating remotely today. And of course, our hearings and meetings are always live streamed on YouTube. So if you'd just like to watch the proceedings, you may do so by going to our YouTube channel. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our Director of Preservation, Corey Harala, to take us through the afternoon agenda.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. We'll begin with public meeting item number 4, LPC 22-06302. This is an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, Block 632, Lot 30. 131 Charles Street, the 131 Charles Street House individual landmark, also in the Greenwich Village Historic District extension. This is a federal style row house built in 1834 with a back house. The application is to construct a dormer and rear yard addition, alter facades, eliminate a passageway, and excavate the cellar and rear yard. This was last presented at the public hearing of January 10th, 2023, and no action was taken at that time. The applicants will present the revisions to the proposal after we open the proceedings.
All right, so we need to open the proceedings. Commissioner Chapin, would you make a motion to open the proceedings? Oh, just unmute.
So moved.
Thank you. And Vice Chair Brand, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the applicants may present.
Okay, commissioners, the applicants have entered the hearing. Jackie, you now have control of the presentation. You can advance the slides using your arrow keys or your mouse. Please state your name for the record. You may begin.
Thank you, Abby. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me just introduce. This is Valerie Campbell of Kramer Levin. She's going to make a brief statement before we make the presentation. Thank you, Valerie. Please go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, commissioners. Before Jackie presents the revised proposal, I'd like to say a few words about the Commission's jurisdiction over the horse walk at 131 Charles Street. As you know, by law, the Commission is charged with regulating exterior architectural features of buildings. Except in the case of interior landmarks, the Commission does not have the authority to regulate interior features. The Commission's jurisdiction does not expand to interior features because the building here is both an exterior and an individual landmark. In either case, the Commission can only regulate work with respect to exterior architectural features. At 131 Charles, the entrance to the horse walk is currently through a modern door that has a glass window. However, any visibility to the interior courtyard through this window can be legally blocked without a permit by the owner's installation of a shade or a curtain. Moreover, in this case, a historic photograph that was not presented at the first public hearing supports the fact that the historic door to the horse walk from the street was solid and blocked any view to the interior court. Historic maps also show that the horse walk appeared to have terminated in another wooden structure, at least at certain times in its history. The horse walk at 131 Charles is almost 100% enclosed. It is a roofed passage that is 35 feet long, 3 feet in width, and it lacks any significant interior architectural detail. In our view, the fact that the horse walk is currently open at the rear does not convert this largely enclosed passageway to an architectural feature that the Commission can regulate as if it were an exterior feature. Even when the Commission regulates interior alterations behind the glass to ensure there is no adverse impact on exterior features, the Commission generally limits its jurisdiction to the area that is within an 18-inch distance behind the glass. Here, the proposed alterations will maintain the historic appearance of the horse walk from the public way and will maintain the horse walk opening at the rear of the building in its original location. The alterations that will occur behind these doors are in keeping with the alterations that the Commission has approved in other cases, such as 61 Bank Street and 240 West 12th Street, where the Commission approved the installation of stairways at horse walks to provide access to a lowered rear yard. In our view, the modifications that have been made to the horsewalk in the revised proposal and the reduced scope of the proposed excavation are entirely commission precedent and the limited extent of the commission's jurisdiction over the interiors of private homes. Thank you. And now Jackie will go ahead and present the revised proposal.
Thank you, Valerie, and thank you, commissioners and landmark staff. My name is Jackie Pudu-Vallon, preservation consultant on the project. I'm sorry that I can't be there in person today, but I'm participating in the summer COVID outbreak. So I'm here today as well with the architect, James Sacecorn of the Turret Collaborative, consulting engineers, Robert Bellardi, Plan B Engineering, and Mohammed Rahal, Severud, and Valerie Campbell, who you just met. This project is 131 Charles Street, an 1834 federal row house with a back house that was built as a stable in the 1840s. As Corey already said, this is an individual landmark located in the Greenwich Village Historic District Extension. This application was last presented to you on January 10th. The application is for altering the horsewalk passage, excavating to connect the two houses below grade, constructing a rear addition at the cellar level, and installing a dormer at the rear of the roof and alterations to the back house. Here's the house located on the district map. Here on top is a block elevation showing you the house in context with its larger neighbors. And here on the bottom is a photo montage showing you the south side of the street. Here's the house in its existing condition in context of the streetscape. To the right is 129 Charles, a former stable building, which is the home of the current owner of 131 Charles. Back in January, the proposal was to excavate a new subcellar under the main house and the entire lot, which would connect the front house and the back house below grade, and to seal the entrance to the horsewalk passage, which currently has a door at the opening, and to install a false door so that the area of the horsewalk would become functional space at the interior of the house. In response to commissioner comments and concerns about the degree of excavation under the main house, the team has worked very hard to remove any potential impact from excavation under the main house, so that now the extent of excavation under the main house has been dramatically reduced, so that the only excavation proposed is to lower the floor at the cellar by approximately 2 feet, which is within the depth of the existing walls, and no underpinning would be necessary. My interpretation of the rules is that if we'd submitted that degree of excavation as a separate application, it would have met the rules for a staff level permit. The proposal also includes excavating under the horsewalk passage. Sorry, COVID is affecting my brain. The proposal also includes excavating under the horsewalk passage, which is currently at grade, and you can see that in the proposed section on the right. This way, the space under the horsewalk can connect to the rest of the cellar. This type of excavation is consistent with other commission-approved cellar excavations, such as at 77 Jane Street and 81 Charles Street, and alterations to horsewalks, such as 61 Bank Street and 340 West 12th Street, where the commission approved installing a staircase at horsewalks leading down to a lowered rear yard. Our engineers present can speak to this, but this degree of excavation, as I said before, under the main house and the horsewalk would not undermine any existing walls and would not necessitate underpinning. Additionally, the proposal now includes retaining a portion of the horsewalk passage at the front of the house, creating a storage area behind the new door to the horsewalk opening, which you can see here in this proposed section where I'm circling. These are the rear facade elevations. I should have said before. So the center elevation is the previous proposal you saw in January, and on the right is the current proposal. At the rear, the proposal now includes installing in January, the proposal included installing a shed dormer at the roof, constructing a one-story full-width addition at the cellar level, excavating a portion of the rear yard in front of that addition, creating a terraced rear yard, and installing French doors at the first floor. The revised proposal on the right shows retaining the location of the horsewalk with a false door installed at its opening, retaining the grade in a path in front of the horsewalk door and lowering only a portion of the rear yard in front of the proposed one-story addition. The proposed addition would be clad in a wood rain screen and feature multi-light glass doors to better relate to the existing windows on the rest of the facade. And constructing a dormer at the roof that mimics the gabled dormers at the front of the house with mullioned windows that better relate to the existing fenestration and design in design and proportion. At the back house, the proposal previously, as you can see at center, was to install French doors with transoms at the ground floor and to construct a stairway bulkhead at the roof and to install mechanical units and railings at the roof. The proposal is now to retain the grade in front of the back house and therefore not lower its facade, to install new French doors, to restore the opening of the hayloft to its original size at the second floor, which is documented by a scar on the facade and a historic drawing that was found at the Municipal Archive, and to install shutters that recreate the look of the original hayloft shutters. Here's the existing axonometric views of the main house and the back house. Here you can see the dormer at the roof of the main house. Oops, hold on. I'm sorry, the dormers that are present at the front of the main house, which served as the design inspiration for the new dormer at the rear. And these axonometric views looking west, you can see the previous proposed and current proposed conditions. On the right are the current proposed conditions. You can see the revised dormer at the roof, the retention of the grade level in front of the back house, the limited sunken garden behind the main house. On the left is the previous proposal in this other axonometric view. And on the right, you see the current proposed dormer, mimicking the dormers on the front of the house, but with a slightly set back connection between them. At the cellar, you see the reduced one-story addition with a sunken garden in front of it. You can see the false door at the rear of the horse walk. I'm circling here. And you can see that by retaining the grade level in a path in front of the horse walk and joining it with the existing grade in front of the back house, the historic relationship between the location of the horse walk and the back building is retained. This is a photo of the existing conditions at the front of the house and the door that's present at the horse walk opening now. And here are historic photos showing how the door has changed over time. On the left are photos showing a plank door with long straps from 1928, which was likely the original door, or at least was consistent with early 19th century door styles. So this historic photo now serves as the design inspiration for the new door. Here's the elevation drawing showing that proposed plank door and a rendering, and again, the historic photo. Here are those front facade elevations again, and the sections through the horse walk showing the storage area that would be behind the new door at the horse walk. For further comparison, here's a section looking south showing the slightly lowered floor at the cellar level and the proposed dormer at the roof, which would provide additional ceiling height in the attic. Here are renders, the previous rendering for the front facade, the proposed current rendering on the right. Here are photos of the existing conditions at the rear facade, including the location of the existing horse walk. And here are the elevation drawings again for the rear of the main house. Here's a rendering showing on the left the previous proposal, and on the right the current proposal. Again, this is as if you're standing in front of the back house, and you can see that with this proposal that that historic relationship with which the commissioners spoke to during the last hearing of the back house to the former stable building is maintained by keeping a path between the historic horse walk location and the building that originally functioned as a stable. Here is the photo of the existing condition of the rear building, and on the right is the original drawing that was an old municipal archive file, which was in part the impetus for the new design, where you can see here the original hayloft doors. And is a scar on the building here where you can see the brick was infilled to install a smaller window at some point. And here's the elevation again for the previous proposal for the back house and the current proposal.
That's right.
Here are renders of the previous proposal and current proposal for the back house alterations and the change in grade at, I should say, maintaining the grade and creating a sunken garden between the back house and its patio and the addition at the main house. This is the existing section through the building, through the site. This is the previous proposed section and the current proposed section, where you can see the excavation under the rear yard would also extend underneath the proposed addition, and in part connect the main house to the excavated portion of the rear yard and the back house. This is a section looking the other way, existing, previous proposal, current proposed. And these are the floor plans showing changes at the cellar level and rear yard. I'm sorry, rear yard here. And I think that's really, oh, we should speak to materials. So this is the proposed wood rain screen for the cladding of the addition. Other than that, there would be bluestone rough ashlar at the walls, and proposed color for the horse walk door and shutters, and a light gray paint color for new windows and door frames. And with that, we are open to your questions. And as I said before, we have the architect and engineer present to answer your questions.
All right, thank you very much. Commissioners, do we have questions of the applicant? And yes, Vice Chair Bland, please go ahead.
I'm wondering why such a deep excavation under not the house itself now, the front house, but the rest of the lot, including the rear house. Why so deep?
Speak into the microphone so the Zoom can pick you up.
My name is James Acorn with the Tourette Collaborative. It is true that when we previously designed the excavation, it was quite deep. And that's because we had proposed to lower the courtyard by 3 feet. In this version, we could raise it. And that is something that we had been discussing with the owner. So that currently, whereas we have approximately 15'1" of ceiling height, that could be reduced to 12 or even less. So that is something that the owner has considered.
Okay, thanks for that clarification.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Ginsburg.
I have a question for our council. Do you agree with the interpretation that was given to us at the beginning about the horse walk? No. The landmark staff have looked very carefully at this issue, and there's been correspondence between Mark, our general counsel, and Valerie on this. And our view is the horse walk, because the rear of it is unenclosed and is open to the backyard, is a significant exterior architectural feature that you can regulate. You can give permission to remove it, to modify it, or preserve it.
Okay, other questions? Yes, Commissioner Jefferson.
You can modify.
So the question is whether we have jurisdiction over the horse walk, the interior of the horse walk, whether it's an interior feature or an exterior feature. And John is explaining that it is for I guess our interpretation is that it's an exterior feature because it's open at the back. And so it is subject to our regulation.
Okay, and the courtyard also is part of it.
Yes.
I'm also confused. I went through the designation, why it became a landmark. and the criteria that was used for landmarking it back in 1965 or whatever it was, 66. So that still applies, right?
Yes, it's an individual landmark. It was an early designation, so the designation report is quite brief, but I think that it was designated for its age and style and its level of intact features. And so we're looking at proposed alterations, some of which are not visible from a public way, but still under our jurisdiction.
Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, so maybe we are ready to move to our discussion. And so, as we've stated, we do regulate the horse walk. The applicants, the last public hearing, there was much discussion, and I think that the sort of common themes in all of the comments around the table were that the excavation should be pulled away from the main house, that excavation was okay in the back portions, but not under the main house, that the horse walk should be kept, and that the dormer should be at the back, the new shed dormer should be restudied to better relate to the style of the building and not be a flat roofed shed dormer. And that the scale of the fenestration, particularly I think at the back house, be restudied. And so the applicants have come back today. They have limited the excavation below the main house to just 2 feet, which doesn't require underpinning, which in and of itself would be eligible for a staff level permit. They have restudied the dormer, modeling it on the 2 dormers at the front, but adding a connecting piece between them to increase the ceiling height in the attic space. They restudied the fenestration on the back house and are modeling. They're no longer doing French doors as tall because they're keeping the grade where it is, and then they're modeling the hayloft window. And finally, with the horse walk, they are proposing to keep it open for a number of feet at the front, but install a door, and then to otherwise fill it up, but to also create a false door at the back and to limit the width of the rear yard addition to create a pathway from that space, which would have been the back of the horse walk, to the backyard. So to sort of evoke its presence. And I think in terms of the alterations to the horse walk, they are now, I think, consistent with some of the approvals that the commission has done in the past, and that keeping part of it and putting a door in front of it. So I think that it's moving in that direction. And but those are really the 4 components that we discussed last time. And so we'll have our discussion again. And I do, before we begin our discussion, just want to note for the record, as you all know, we did receive a letter from Assemblymember Glick and Councilmember Botcher, as well as letters from Village Preservation, Victorian Society of New York, Historic Districts Council, and 4 individuals who are expressing concerns about the work. Those letters were shared with the commissioners in advance of today's public meeting. And so we'll begin our discussion. Commissioner okay. Let's see. Commissioner Ginsburg, I know you weren't here last time. So Commissioner Ginsburg, would you mind starting this one?
I can, since I wasn't on the commission last.
Either.
Right.
No. Let me not start with you.
Okay.
Commissioner Jefferson, I think last time you had expressed keeping some of the administration and character of the back house. And then similarly with all of the other commissioners, asked that the excavation be pulled away from the main house, that the building be more consistent with the style of the building, and that the horse walk be kept. So how are you feeling
You have to
today?
forgive me because I went back. I saw it the first time, and then I went back and looked at it again. And I went back and looked at the designation. And I went back and in my mind, what a landmark building is, what it means to me, and I think it should mean to society, that it's a certain quality that should remain that way. And a light touch should be applied to whatever we do to it. In this particular case, the back, the courtyard, and the second building, which create that space in the back, is crucial for this to this building. And the facade of the second building is so childlike. It's like my son was drawing a facade. It's simple. It's just basic. This courtyard is just simple. You can't even make it now. And when I look at this, it's gone. It's no longer there. It's something else. It's been removed. It becomes another building, and I find it difficult to support it.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're gonna move around. Vice Chair Bland, I think last time you also felt that the dormer should not be a shed dormer, and also felt that the horse walk should be retained. So how are these changes reading to you today?
Well, I'm glad that I'm glad that my thoughts today are conform with what I've said in the past. Sometimes I wonder if I don't forget. I'm still not happy with the shed approach, this kind of modified dormer in the back. I don't think it should be infilled like that. I think it should just reflect the front and reflect what a dormer would have been in the origins of this house. I think I can accept now the way the horse walk has been incorporated and not incorporated, both in the front and back. In other words, you can see it a bit, but the rest of it is infilled. I think that's acceptable. But I think what Commissioner Jefferson has just said about the rear yard impressed me, and I hadn't really studied that before so much, or hadn't been impressed by it. But the connection of these two houses in space is critical to their understanding of how they were each part of each other. And I think all of this up and down with recessed terraces, et cetera, is kind of ruining all that. So I'm having a problem now, a new problem, I guess it is really with that. I would not be opposed, by the way, of just keeping the horse walk open. I know I live in a townhouse, and I wish all the time I had access from the rear to the front, because everything has to go through the house as opposed through a convenience of what was once a horse walk. But I've already said that I could accept it, but I think it might be smart for the owner to consider keeping it for practical reasons. But anyway, I just want to end by saying I do have now this new problem with the terracing in between the two buildings. That space is crucial, and now it's all broken up by lowered terraces and so forth, which I think kind of ruin the space. So I'm having a problem.
Okay, one of the right challenges of keeping that space, but then continuing to excavate, you then have a different series.
Well, and I should have said my question earlier was why this deep excavation. I still say that, and I say it out of respect for what's been happening around our city, particularly in this part of the city, with deep excavations causing extraordinary dangerous conditions with regard to neighbors. And I just wonder why this has to be so deep. The answer was it doesn't have to be so deep. And I think the commission, and I hope other commissioners will follow up on suggesting that it not be so deep.
Okay, thank you. All right, Commissioner Chapin, I think last time you also agreed really on the sort of four areas of four themes about limiting the excavation to the rear and not under the house, preserving the horse walk, restudying the dormer, and the scale of the fenestration.
Yeah, So I'll just start with the horse walk. I think that that's handled appropriately. I actually was thinking about the dormer myself and wondering about the appearance of it, and I agree with Commissioner Bland's remarks about, that a couple of dormers up there would be more appropriate than having a shed across the two dormers. I think that I'm pleased that they have limited the excavation substantially. That's a good thing. And that they brought the grade up so that the back building now doesn't seem, in plan at least, to look as it looks more subordinate, as it should, in the because of the change of the grade. So that's good. I think the fenestration generally works fine for me. Commissioner Bland's remarks about that sort of well that's been created, I mean, they have made more of a connection than was there previously. They definitely have, between the two buildings. I was thinking perhaps a way to address it and retain some of that area that they're trying to achieve would be to put some kind of a cover over it, a glass cover or something. I don't know about the feasibility of that, but something, or a terrace or something, so that it appeared at least to be, that the connection appeared to be there, even if that sort of I'm calling it a well condition continued to exist. So there might be a solution to that would let the client have what they want in terms of having that, and still really give you the sense that there's the connection that Fred was just talking about. I also would, like to see excavation limited further where that's possible. Just in terms of the safety features, it was being said, well, it's only 2 feet now, but there are areas where that's not the case, that involving the main building. So as I understand it, so, whatever they can do to, somewhat further limit excavation, particularly under that main building, I think is very important, because we have been losing these older buildings, in some cases involving excavation. And, I just would like a lot of care to be taken in this case. So I think a lot of improvement has been made, and, those are my comments.
Great, thank you very much. Commissioner Lutfi, again, you expressed the same concerns again about pulling the excavation away from the house, restudying the dormer, and keeping the horse walk.
So I agree a lot with a lot that's been said, and I agree with many of the comments that Commissioner Jefferson mentioned. I mean, when you go back to the original house, this is a landmark. And when you go back to the original house, the simplicity of the rear is so much a part of what the essence of this assemblage is, that it's sort of, I feel a little sorry that it is being transformed in a major way. That said, I'm open to some of these changes, even though I'm sorry to see them happen. I do also, just to start with that horse walk, I do think it works on the exterior. It gives you the sense of the walk. However, I also feel like that door should open. And because from a practical standpoint, I completely agree with what Fred said. Like it's like a great way to access the backyard. And and it's, I don't know, it seems to want to be open to me. So I'm just making that comment, and I don't know if everyone agrees with that, but putting it out there. I think the dormer canopy is too complicated in the back. And maybe the middle should come out, but I think it needs to be simplified. I think there's a lot going on now. There still continues to be a lot going on in this building. And I think to the extent that it can be refined and simplified, it would be helpful. I also agree with the comments about the fact that the backyard of the main house is sunken too far deep. I definitely think it's going to affect the light going in there, and it certainly it looks a little cavernous. So I'm glad that the applicant is open to raising that, because I think it would be helpful. And as part of that, I'm in agreement with the limiting of the excavation in general. I can appreciate that the desire from a design standpoint was to make sure that the rears of each building speak to each other in terms of the in terms of the lowest level, but I do wish it was a little simpler, the back building. And because it is a secondary building. And I just think it wants to relate that way to the front building.
All right, great. Thank you very much. Commissioner Chen, you had similar concerns last time as well.
Yeah, and I agree with many of the comments from Vice Chair Brand. I think, in general, the excavation should be minimized to avoid the issues. I think the horse walk is an improvement over last time, at least in my review. I think the dormer, I will leave it to the rest of the commission to decide. I am not so sure about the middle, whether it's too cavernous or what. So I also want to defer to the majority what they feel about in the middle. So those are my comments.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Ginsburg, so I know you were not here when this was initially presented, but hopefully the presentation and discussion.
I in general agree with every commissioner comment, particularly Commissioner Jefferson, about that reward being broken up. I think on the dormer, we have what I'd say is neither fish nor fowl. I either go back to the original one or get rid of the middle part. I realize that it would be to the original one, would be in contradiction to what the commissioners feel. And I agree, lessening excavation would be good. And I think the horse walk is probably all right.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Goldblum. You weren't here the first time either, but I think hopefully you've been able to understand the scope and how it's evolved.
Yeah, and I think I share a lot of the sentiments expressed previously, but I think my thoughts on how to address those sentiments is a little bit different. I think if you go to the demolition elevations, which I'm trying to do myself. Here we go. That's page 19. I have some difficulty, 19, and the previous one is, there we go. Let's start on page 16. All right, page 16 shows the existing and proposed. The second floor far right window that's shown fixed in its current location. In other words, it's currently kind of fallen off to the left a little bit and they're kind of moving it back. I vehemently, strongly oppose that. I think that that is a case of trying to improve a historic condition that does not bear improving. And also that particular window in its alignment with the horse walk kind of plays a game with the horse walk to bring the horse walk, which is an eccentric feature, into the kind of regularizing impulse of that period that should be retained. And then if you go to the page 19, the back house, or the back building, I'm not convinced by the photograph that the center window was that much wider. It looked from the photograph like it might have been lower. And I would ask the staff to look at that carefully. If there is historical evidence for the widening and lowering of that sill, then I could accept it. But I don't accept the fact that there's a drawing that clearly doesn't represent the final condition and using that as a precedent. For me, it's not about what the architect might have done. It's about what the architect did. So I think that that should be investigated with staff before it's approved. The shutters, again, I would leave that to staff. If staff believes that such a building would have had shutters or such a opening would have had shutters, then I could accept it in the design proposed. But again, I'm not convinced, and I wouldn't necessarily rely on an archival drawing of something that wasn't in the end done. In terms of the excavation, I feel that we have approved projects of similar extent of excavation on buildings of similar period and age. So I don't feel that that's an inappropriate thing. I certainly share others' sentiments about the quality of that space. And what I would suggest as kind of my response to what was discussed by previous commissioners is that the problem with the pit in front of the big house, front house, is how, for me, is how it modifies the impression or the effect or the quality of the back house. Whereas the back house used to sit on a level court that one could imagine a horse, say, walking onto and being kept on. Now there's kind of like this little fringe, a little sliver. So I would suggest that instead of concerning myself with the depth of the pit, I would concern myself with the breadth of the pit. And right now it's about 2/3, 1/3, I think, something like that, or 3/5, 2/5. I would suggest that it be half and half. I would suggest extending the on-level portion of the patio towards the front house, so there was more courtyard from which you could experience the back house. I think that the dormer, for me, we've done dormers like that on federal period houses on the back. We've seen examples of historical dormers like that. And I think that, if there's clearly is not sentiment for approving it, regardless of that, I would say that the applicant should consider deepening the shed, making it shallower, deepening the gap between the two dormers so that the effect was more of two individual dormers, even though you got the space that you need. I think, you might just do that by having the setback be further setback. In terms of the horse walk, I'm totally convinced by our council's comments. I think that the feature is a unique feature and contributed to the designation of the building as an individual landmark and should therefore be preserved as a three-dimensional volume. However, I think it can be enclosed and made part of the house. I think you can modify the brick sidewall such that the space can be incorporated into the house and be made part of the interior. I think you can have stuff happening off of it, but I think that the notion of a continuous three-dimensional volume that is a kind of integral feature of this house should be preserved.
All right, thank you very much. And Commissioner Hooper Smith came in after the presentation, so I think didn't say enough to comment today. But at any rate, we have had a lot of very thoughtful comments. Thank you, commissioners, as always. So we will not take an action today. We'll ask the applicants to continue to study the scope and scale of the interventions. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, commissioners. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, and we'll now move back to public meeting item number 1. So, Gina, this is the one we're going to accuse me.
All right, I'll read in public meeting item number 1. LPC 23-03194, an application for certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Brooklyn, block 1838, lot 9, 162 Hancock Street in the Bedford Historic District. This is currently a parking area and the application is to construct a new building. This was last presented at the public meeting of June 13th, 2023. No action was taken at that time. The applicants will present their revisions to the proposal after we open the proceedings.
All right, so let's make a motion to open proceedings. Commissioner Chan, would you make a motion to open proceedings?
So both.
Thank you, Commissioner Ginsburg. Would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, the applicants may present.
Okay, commissioners, the applicants have entered via Zoom. Jackie, you now have control of the presentation. You just need to click on your screen. And then you can advance the slides using your arrow keys, your mouse. Please state your name for the record. You may begin.
Thank you, Abby. Hello again, commissioners. Jackie Pudu-Vallon, preservation consultant on this project. As Corey already stated, this was last seen by you on June 13th when you took no action. At that public hearing, commissioners asked that we refine and restudy the details at the front and rear facades and lower the height of the proposed rooftop addition. I'd like to introduce the architect, Ana Maria Torres of AT Architects, to take you through the proposal and the changes that have been made.
Good afternoon to all, and thank you, Jackie, for the introduction. Today, as Jackie indicated, we are going to go over the modifications that was made on the design based on the comments that we received on June 13th. Next. In the next 2 images, you are seeing kind of the drawings of comparison of what was presented on June 13 and the revised that we are presenting today in the front for the front and the rear facade. On the front facade, the elements that were revised, and we will see it through the presentation today, are the proportion of the bay window versus the overall facade, the size and proportion of the fenestration versus the mass of the building, and the bulkhead that was questioned in June 13. These are kind of the most important elements. We will go over more detailed elements. Next, please. On the rear, the elements that were revisited from the previous design is the fenestration. Originally we have, and the trellises. Originally we have trellises on both sides of, along the whole facade. Now they are eliminated only to one side, and the French windows were changed to double hung windows. And again, the bulkhead has been eliminated, and it was also requested. Then the proposed, sorry, I just lost the word. The proposed parapet was changed to a railing. My apologies. Next. This is the facade that was presented on June 13. Next. And this is the facade that we are presenting. Next, please. This is the facade that we are presenting now. As you can, no, please, can you go back to the previous? As you can see, the proportion of the bay window was reduced. The entry door, that was one of the questions that the commissioner had, and was not completely centered on the part of the entrance. Now is fully centered and fully aligned. The first floor with the basement is all the same material, brown stone, just mix of brown stone and brick as proposed before. The windows on the bay window were reduced to match the same number of windows on the floors above. And the transom on the top floor was eliminated to just kind of recreate and maintain a more massive approach, yes, with brownstone. And we revisit and kind of create a more minimal interpretation of the existing cornice on 116th Street in this building with a more detailed or with a modern kind of approach to the detail, not trying to be historical as we didn't do it in the first proposal. Next, please. This is how the building before on June, in the presentation of June 13 was kind of incorporated within the block. Next. That is how it's going to feel now with the looking at from the front across the street. Next. One of the questions the commissioner had was the volume. And here you see that the volume of the footprint of 160 Hancock, the length in the maximum length of the building is 58 feet because it has a knob coming out and 6 inches. The shorter is 45 and 6. The overall of the proposed building in 162 Hancock is 50 feet and 5 inches. The facades are fully aligned and the bay window also are fully aligned. That means they have the same depth. Next. In this diagram is also trying to respond to one of the questions of the height of the building. This is the proposed height of 162 Hancock is aligned with the existing height of 160 Hancock. They are both, the roof height is 40 feet, and what it was first parapet from the previous presentation now is a railing. We have the penthouse, and it's at 49 feet, it's still lower than the buildings on the neighbor, like for example, 168 Hancock. Next. This is the visual study that was presented on June 13, and the question that was raised was the height of the bulkhead above the penthouse. Then you can see in the images on the bottom right. Next. Now, by eliminating the bulkhead, because what we did is just creating an exterior stair, then it's just kind of hiding with the, continuing with the lateral wall, and it's only you will see the volume across the street with the penthouse. Next. That is the next two slides are just only the site elevation, the drawings of the site elevations, the previous one and the one presented today. Next. This is the original facade that was presented in June 13. The materiality I am not talking about because that continues. It was brick in the presentation of June 13 and still brick with some detailing of coping of brownstone on the top. Next. The trellises, as the comments were made, were reduced to only half of the building because the building is, the facade is not straight, it has kind of an indent, and the windows are all double hung windows. They are following the back, the rear facades of the block, maintaining the height. Then they were, both buildings are up 40 feet, as I said before, and changing the parapet to a railing. Next. The following question was about the airway on the front of the building, because in June 13, you see the slide in front of you. We have the entrance to the cellar coming out from the front of the building, and that was kind of questionable on how to study and find another solution. Next. The solution was to eliminate completely that access to the cellar. Now the main stairs is going directly from the ground floor all the way down to the cellar. Then now in the front only we have a very gentle ramp to have access to the ADA apartment that is at the basement level. The next slides are just kind of reminding, you can keep going, Jackie, reminding them how is the lot looking right now. Next. How the front facade, so you will see it from the front and nothing has changed because you really will not see the penthouse across the street there frontally. Next. These are just a larger views than you were presented before on the visual studies when you are walking from Marcy Avenue to Nostrum Avenue, then you will see a glimpse of the penthouse. Next. When you are walking in the same direction, this is the view from across the street in diagonal towards 162 Hancock. Next. These are the section that we are keeping here just to ensure that the foundation that is proposed to the side of 160 Hancock will not do underpinning. The 160 Hancock will not be touched because the foundation will be done inside of the property of 162 Hancock. Next. These are just to confirm. Then we have been maintaining with the size of the windows and the more modern interpretation of the detailing of the existing brownstones, trying to give more character to the new building. Next. 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 This is the view from Nostrum towards Mercy Avenue. Then from this point, this is the reason the visual study was not made from that direction because you will not see the penthouse from this side. Next. And this is the floor plan just to confirm that in the cellar level and basement level, the main stair is going down all the way, and the access from the front facade has been fully eliminated. Just please, next are just the layout of the apartments. This hasn't been changed substantially. Next, except for the trellises and the windows, and now they are overhung, as we say, and the trellises is only on one side of the building. Next. And then this is the other major change because we don't have the wellhead was eliminated. Now it's only an exterior staircase and it's going to be hidden under the extension of the side facade going for access for fire department on the roof of the penthouse. Next. This is the elevations that we saw before. Next. This is the materiality. We maintain the same materials we presented in June 13 with the brown stone, the brick, and we just adding a fiberglass on the molded cornice with the idea always to be within the same kind of color palette. Then we create just by the difference of textures of the materials and the tonality within the same spectrum of color, create kind of a pleasant design. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioners, do we have any questions? All right, not seeing, yes, Commissioner Holford Smith.
What is the material of the gridded area in the cornice?
Sorry, it's fiberglass.
It's all fiberglass.
Yes, the molded, the square molded is all fiberglass. It's all framed with brown stone as the trims will be from the base.
So where does the fiberglass start? Is that?
It's kind of recessed like a panel. I don't know if I can come into
So
it.
it's just the gridded portion.
Yeah, it's just the gridded.
The sort of cornice line below is not.
It's just, sorry.
And then that piece that's underneath it there's a shadow line that's made out of stone,
These ones,
the
yeah, the
horizontal.
idea is all of these will be all made of stones, the stone.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Goldblum.
So your bulkhead has a stair that goes from the roof up to the roof of the bulkhead, right? And that's the one that's
It's not
concealed.
bulkhead, it's the penthouse.
Penthouse, excuse me.
Sorry,
Sorry, so the roof of the penthouse is accessed by that stair.
yes,
And the
still,
reason you're putting that stair there is solely for FDNY?
yes.
Now,
And also it's more easy to maintain the roof,
okay,
things
so,
like that.
because what we've seen here a lot is people who seem to fulfill that same obligation with a ladder.
Yes.
Why did you choose a stair instead of a ladder?
In the end, if any kind of, I don't know, I think then it's more pleasing to see it than not to have the ladder in the facade. And also it's more practical for maintenance. If in the end they propose to put a small condenser there, it's much easier for access or anything like that.
Yet, if they do that, then you'll have to put a railing up there.
Yeah, we will need a small court because it's not going to be used by the building.
Right, but if you have service equipment up there, then you have to have a railing.
I don't know that yet, but yeah.
Important point, because that will affect what you see from this vantage point, right?
That will be, that is what will be seen from that point. Yes, if we have already. Yeah.
Thank you.
Right, but the stair itself is concealed behind a parapet wall, is that right?
Yes.
So, and I guess the
You can have a parapet recess because it's large enough, then you can have a recess within the view. Then you don't need to really see it within because it's just maintenance. You can have even the railing and the parapet recess from the penthouse because the penthouse is large enough to allow to be recessed,
Okay.
have access, and you don't see it from the street.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Okay, I'm not seeing other questions. So we'll move on. A note for the record that we did receive letters signed by 67 individuals noting that the proposal is moving in the right direction, but still expressing some concerns. And those again were shared in advance of today's public meeting. So when we saw this last time, the comments were really, as we discussed it, I think everybody thought the design approach was okay and that it didn't need to replicate the row, but that the design should have a stronger relationship to the row at the front and the back, and that those comments really focused on the solid to void ratio and wanting to see more masonry and less glazing. And then on the front facade in particular, adding a level of details and thinking about materials and proportions that relate to the row. And so some of the specific comments were to bring the brownstone up to the parlor floor, to follow that datum line across with the rest of the row previously of brick, to center the bay, to widen the stoop to help it integrate better into the facade, and to add a level of detail, particularly at the cornice. And so they have made steps toward all of those suggestions. And at the back, again, they have changed the solid to void ratio and now have punched openings that relate to the row. And the commission also suggested a railing instead of a parapet so that the roof lines would align, which they have done as well. So, and I think everybody suggested that the bulkhead was too visible and that should be addressed. And so they've eliminated it from the project. So we'll begin our discussion. Commissioner Holford Smith, would you like to start?
Sure.
And I'll just note for the record, Commissioner Lutfi is recused on this item.
Well, I think they've done a really good job of addressing our comments. I think that the changes to the design give it more texture and a little more complexity and reducing the amount of glazing, especially on the parlor floor, widening the stoop and centering the door and the windows makes it much more rational. I think the introduction of the sort of the textured grid at the cornice is good and sort of reminiscent of similar patterns that you see on the historic buildings in the area. And I think what they've done in the back is to helps to simplify the design of the rear. I think having the railing in lieu of the parapet is good, and not having the full width sort of terraces. So I think I can approve it as presented today.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Goldblum?
I too think it's much improved, and I agree with much of what Ann said. I think that the front facade in general is appropriate as designed. I would suggest to the applicant to consider changing that fiberglass to the stone. It's really easy to do that detail in stone. And in 5 or 10 years, the fiberglass will start to look very different from the brownstone. And so I think that if the intended effect was to have it be brownstone, it's not that big a deal to make it brownstone.
Or
I think that
would you also consider a cast stone?
Oh, yeah, no, yes, something that'll perform in a similar manner, age. No, fiberglass, the UV is going to change the way it looks. So the bulkhead, I think, is still a little bit too big, but I think they could work with staff on it. Right now, it's 9'10" from roof surface to roof surface. I don't think it needs to be quite that high. And I think that they should look with staff on that wing wall thing. I understand the idea is to kind of hide the stair, but I think it just increases the overall visibility of the roof stuff and attracts attention to itself. I think if they cut it down to be like a solid rail with a stone cap on it, it would be less intrusive. And they also might explore working with staff on the materiality of the bulkhead by making it brick. I think it brings it into the language of the facade and the finished architecture. I think that in the past we've encouraged people to look at turn color coated steel or zinc or things like that, or even stucco. Just make it a little bit more of a background element. I think the back facade was a really hard challenge. I think they did a fine job with it. I have no concerns with that.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to start to go around with the people who were present last time, and then I'll get to others. So Commissioner Jefferson.
Yeah, I think they did a beautiful design resolution of the facade. I thought the detailing of this was just amazing, the complexity of it. The relationship, the front facade, the upper window reduction in size and proportion makes it much better, makes the facade much better. The rear facade is also beautifully done. It echoes the existing language of the donut, although anyway, it works well. I think application is appropriate. It's appropriate to construct a new building.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioner Chen, you also were here and had similar thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with the commissioner's comments. I think this is much improved, especially in the rear facade, made it simpler, the narrow. It's really contextual to the neighbors. And I agree, some of the suggestions from Michael Goldblum that they could work with staff about reforming some of the points he alluded to. But I agree with Ann in general. This is appropriate as is.
Okay, thank you very much. And Commissioner King, and you were also here last time, agreed with many of the comments that were made about the solid to void ratio and the details. How are you feeling now? Commissioner Chapin, can you hear?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yes, I think they did a fine job, really, of changing the proportions on the front facade in the back. I agree with the other commissioners in that regard, and I think I can approve it as presented. I think it's the changes made in response to our comments are very successful.
Thank you very much. All right, and Vice Chair Bland, you were not present at the initial public hearing, but hopefully you've been able to see the evolution of the project and are able to comment.
Yes, I think I am. I just want to say that when an architect is confronted with a row and his or her job is to create a new building adjacent to that row, it's whether that architect wants to remain in a historic application or a contemporary application. The job is relatively straightforward, I think. In this row, there's a great variety of architectural expression, and I think this architect had a harder time, but solved it in a beautiful way by getting kind of in the blood of, you might say, an original architect back when this row was first built. So I'm quite impressed by how, with our help, I suppose, by the comments that were made by my commissioners earlier, how the architect has responded in a way that makes this actually a really kind of ravishing and beautiful building. I think the details, the proof will be in the pudding with the details. And as always, when we operate in a historic mode like this, the details are going to be telling whether it's pulled off or not. I think Michael Goldblum's point about the grill work in the top not being or being moved to be stone is correct, and that should be done. But all in all, I just want to compliment the architect. I'm very impressed with what a beautiful addition this will be, I think, to the row and to the street.
Great. Thank you very much. And Commissioner Ginsburg.
I agree with a lot of the other commissioners' comments and think this is approvable.
Okay. All right. So I want to thank you for listening to the comments and addressing them in such a careful and thoughtful way. So we have a consensus to support it today, but I think we'll do an approval of modifications to restudy the material for the grill work to be more stone or cast stone or stone-like. And also to continue to work with the staff to think about how to reduce reduce the height and rethink the finish of the penthouse. You're comfortable with that, Anne? Okay, great.
In the matter of LPC 23-03194, 162 Hancock Street in the Bedford Historic District. Let's see. Okay, I know that the lot a parking area in the application is to construct a new building. I note that the lot is within the Bedford Historic District, which consists mainly of masonry row houses constructed between 1870 and 1900, ranging from modest Italianate and Neo-Grec houses built in the 1870s to lavishly ornamented Neo-Grec, Queen Anne, Romanesque Revival, and Renaissance Revival structures from the 1880s and 1890s. I recommend approval with modifications, finding that the construction of a new building at this site will enhance the continuity of the street wall, which is currently broken by the existing vacant lot. That the height of the building will relate well to the predominant height of the buildings on the street. That the depth of the building and its projection into the central green space will be consistent with other buildings within the block, and a slightly deeper footprint than the adjacent row house will signify the termination of the adjoining row. That the composition of the facade is based on typical 19th century row house form with an areaway, stoop, parlor floor entrance, regular punched window openings, and a crowning cornice. That the stepped, planar variation of the front facade is in keeping with the varied planes of other buildings in the streetscape. That the design and materials of the front facade, including brick and brownstone cladding and the projecting bay, metal-clad wood, double-hung windows, I'll skip the fiberglass, I'd say parapet, black painted metalwork will harmonize with the adjacent buildings and will help the building blend into the surrounding streetscape. that the penthouse, which will be set back from the front and rear facades, will not be visible from directly across the street and will moderately visible over the building from other vantage points, will harmonize with the building and will not detract from the streetscape. That the rear facade, featuring brick masonry with punched openings and partial width balconies, will be simply designed with the high solid to void ratio and will be residential in character. And that the proposed building will not diminish the special architectural and historic character of the historic district. I recommend, though, that the applicant work with staff to review the material for the cornice to be either stone or cast stone, and to try to lower the height of the balcony, of the bulkhead if possible, and to look at the projecting wing wall at the stair.
All right, and Commissioner Jefferson, would you second that motion?
Second.
Thanks. John, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Vice Chair Bland,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen. Aye. Commissioner Ginsburg. Aye. Commissioner Goldblum. Aye. Commissioner Holford Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson. Aye. 8 in favor, none opposed. The motion passes.
Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you. Please continue to work with the staff and good luck. We'll move to the next item.
All right, we'll now move to public meeting item number 2, LPC 22-07227. This is an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the borough of Brooklyn, block 1676, lot 61, 345 Decatur Street, in the Bedford-Stuyvesant Expanded Stuyvesant Heights Historic District. This is a stripped Italianate style row house designed by George H. Pryor and built in 1878 with later alterations. The application is to alter facades, construct a rooftop addition, and excavate a portion of the rear yard. And this was last presented at the public hearing of April 25th, 2023, and no action was taken at that time. The applicants will present their revisions to the proposal after we open the proceedings.
All right, and we'll do that now. Commissioner Chen, would you make a motion to open the proceedings?
So moved.
Thank you. And Vice Chair Bland, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the applicants may begin.
Thank you. Next, please. One more after that. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for giving us the opportunity or revised proposal again before this committee. My name is Frederick Bellaloom, and Michael Reagan is also here with me. We represent Garrison Architects and our clients for 345 Decatur Street. As you know, our initial presentation on April 25th concerning the renovation and addition of the residence located at 345 Decatur and any immediate action from this body. Since our previous appearance, we have collaborated with staff to address the insightful feedback offered by both the public and this committee. The core of the feedback, as you may recall, pertains to the front elevation of the building. Next. Okay, and just to remind everybody, this is the historic tax photo. 345 is on the right hand side. Next, please. The residence has undergone substantial modifications since its time of designation. While the essence of its original dimensions has been preserved, the porch was eliminated. Alterations were made to the window and door openings on the ground level. The cornice was removed and the original cladding was resurfaced with the addition of stone veneer. Because of the current state of the facade, our intention is to reinterpret the architectural features. It is our understanding that subsequent to our prior presentation, this committee found our general approach to be appropriate. However, it was suggested that certain facets of the design, material selection, and detailing could benefit from further enhancement. Next, please. Oh, okay. So this is our previously proposed scheme. Next, please. And this is our newly proposed scheme. Next, please. And this is with the shutters closed. Next, please. Okay, and I just want to pause here and I just want to compare the previous proposal with the new one. So firstly, the porch structure has been revised. We increased the member sizes of the structural elements to create a heavier reading, and we worked on the alignment with the neighbor to enhance the way it reads as a row. Second, we redesigned our cornice to make it read heavier and to match more closely with the size and detailing of the original. The cornice is now more corbelled rather than angled, creating more opportunities for shadows and reveals. We hope that the plants emanating down from the cornice will over time add a sense of play, color, and dynamism to the facade and also to the neighborhood. Our clients have lots of plants and are avid gardeners. Third, we strategically altered the window proportions on the second floor to create a sense of hierarchy between the first and the second floor to create more emphasis on the punched openings. Like our neighbor, we're also using a darker color for the window frames to further add contrast to these openings. The sliding shutter system has also been replaced. We changed the system to use smaller symmetrically opening shutters. The shutters are painted to match the color of the siding. The idea is to ensure that when open, they can blend into the siding, thereby reinforcing the dominance of the punctuated openings. The treatment of the siding itself has been refined to an opaque gray stain, lessening the board variation and creating a more uniform surface. And finally, we simplified the cable trellis planter in front of the porch with a more understated in-ground planter. Next, please. So this is all the iterations together. Next, please. And just a note on the probes, it's still our opinion and the contractor's opinion who performed the probes that salvaging the boards will be difficult, and especially trying to reconstitute the entire facade from what is there currently, given how the original openings were modified on the ground floor. It's just in poor condition with the lath and the nail penetration and moisture degradation. Next, please. Okay, so here we just zoom in so you can see the heavier cornice, the smaller shutters, and the opaque gray stain. Next, please. Same thing here, but you can see the porch structure and the heavier members there. Next, please. This is just our wall detail. You can see the double wall assembly. Next, please. And this is our updated cornice detail. You can see the depth and the added fascia pieces. Next, please. Same thing for the porch roof. You can note the heavier structural members below. Next, please. And then this just shows a close-up of the roof, showing a polycarbonate roof system, which creates an interesting shadow effect. The polycarbonate is not visible at all from the front elevation. Next, please. And this is just the base details for the porch, and you can see the sort of the column profile. Next, please. And that's it. That's our presentation. In conclusion, we really appreciated all of your comments and the help from staff to guide us through this. We feel that the facade is responding better to its context while retaining the simplicity we liked about our previous scheme. We feel this approach is in keeping with the spirit of the delicate detailing of the original facade. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Commissioners, do we have any questions? All right. All right. I'm not seeing any questions. Oh, yes. Vice Chair Bland, please go ahead. I didn't see.
Sorry, I just kind of put it up late.
Okay.
I was hoping the architect would expand a little bit more on the cornice detail and the column detail. I just want to understand that a little bit better. He seemed to zoom past it pretty fast.
Oh, yeah, I can explain that a little bit better. I think we took a look at the way the original facade in the historic image looked, and we just kind of designed it to match a little bit more closely. We still wanted the planter to be integrated into the cornice. That was kind of part of the original design. So we kind of worked with both of those. And I think the consensus just from our last presentation was that everything needed to kind of get a heavier kind of feel for heavier reading for everything. And so that's just the way it worked. And it's the same thing for the porch columns. Having kind of the different profile allows for shadows and for kind of a heavier look.
But it's a wide flange steel column. Is that what it is?
Double C channels paired.
Double C channels. Okay. And the cornice, what's the material there?
It's just foam, painted metal. Great form.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, other questions? Yes, Commissioner Ginsburg.
Did the staff look at the existing wood siding to agree with the applicant that it's not salvageable? Or not?
Well, I mean, I think the applicants can address more than what they did. I mean, there were small samples that were removed, 2 square feet or less each. They have the typical marks of when, other generations of siding had put on them. I'm not sure anyone could judge whether the entire facade is salvageable from that small sample set, but I think they, did document that there was deterioration that would probably lead to replacement, and if not complete, then in large part of what's behind there.
Thank you.
There are a lot of nails. It was pretty rudimentary the way that they applied the stone, the crazy paving, if you will. And the lath has rusted, and there are signs of moisture in there as well. So
we also found 2 different kinds of siding back there. Right? And we think like when they removed the porch, they added some other stuff to kind of fill in. Yeah.
Commissioner Goldblum.
The newly proposed siding is a butt jointed tongue groove cedar.
Yeah, it's same thing. Yeah, exactly. More or less the same thing, but darker, more opaque stain, basically.
Right. So it's kind of more like a paint finish.
Yeah, it's going to be much closer to a paint finish.
And the dimension, does the dimension bear any relationship with what was there before?
It's traditional. I think it's 4 inches or 4.5.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks.
All right. Any other questions? All right, so we can begin our discussion. And so, the last time that we saw this, I think, pending some samples of the condition of the underlying material, and given the condition currently with the permastone, the commission was supportive of a contemporary contextual design. But did feel that this design lacked some site-specific detailing that would help it relate to the row and the original fence, which remains at the areaway. And specifically, the comments were about the finish of the wood, which they felt was too beachy and that it needed a solid finish. And that the second floor fenestration and shutter system had a horizontal expression that was at odds with the sort of context of the other row houses, and that shutter system and the proportions should be rethought to have more of a vertical expression and to have hinges rather than tracks, which I believe they've changed. And also in terms of the details, particularly at the porch and at the cornice, to increase the profiles and articulation in those locations. And so they have made a number of changes and have presented them today. So we'll begin our discussion on this one. Vice Chair Bland, would you like to start? I think you were concerned particularly about the finish and that horizontal expression and the shutters at the second floor.
Right. I just want to go back though and say I was horrified by the original picture and how far our society has, what happened. I just want to reiterate, I think I was still amazed by that change in the first 2 slides we're looking at now in the left. I support this approach, this contemporary approach. I think I hope I expressed that pretty clearly before as well. So I support the approach. I still question whether the columns, the steel C-channel columns, are quite big enough, but I'll leave that to a staff level. They look still slightly smaller to me. I think they should pretty much replicate the size of the building that still has the columns to the left. I think the cornice, I mean, clearly they like this idea of planting in the cornice. I think it's strange, but I'm, it's strange, but maybe it's okay. It's worth an experiment, at least in my judgment. Maintaining it is a whole other idea. Maintaining it through a hot and dry summer is going to be a real challenge. And if it fails, the whole cornice idea fails too. So it's a tricky thing, but I'll throw my hat in the ring and as an experiment and hope that it can be maintained. My one continuing problem is simply the size of the windows, particularly on the second level. I think the proportions are just still off. They're too wide. They're not too high. I think that proportion is about right, maybe slightly high. But I think the whole thing would be more elegant if the windows were narrower. The lack of mullions and is okay with me, but I think a little space maybe or something between the shutters would help, and just the elegance of the windows would be improved if they were narrower. That's my only remaining thought, and if others are okay, I don't know if others will be. I'm first to speak. I would accept working with staff on that.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, and I'm just going to turn to Commissioner Chapin next. I think last time you also thought the cornice needed weight, and also concerned about the horizontal expression of the second floor.
Yeah. Am I on? Yeah. I agree with Commissioner Bland in general. I think that it's in general very approvable, and perhaps the windows could be a little narrower. I think that the new shutter approach works much better, and in general, I'm fine with the approach that they're taking, but I agree with his comments.
Okay. So on the second floor windows could be narrower to give a little more space between the shutters. Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a lot.
Okay, thank you. Right, and Commissioner Lutfi, are you ready to comment?
Yeah, I think the moves on this help a lot. Let me just move to I personally think it's vastly improved, but I still think it needs a little tweaking. And I am really like, this project to me can be really, really good. And in terms of the design, and I think some refinements include some of the things that were mentioned. I definitely think there needs to be a little spacing between the shutters. I think the proportions of the windows look better. To allow for that spacing, you might have to modify it a little bit. I also think that the columns are still not wide enough. And I personally think they should be. And I think the cornice could use a little more tweaking. I mean, that's it. Otherwise, I think this could be a really wonderful addition on this street, and certainly a much needed change. That's it.
So on the cornice, when you say it could use a little more tweaking, do you mean in terms of its height or its depth, or?
I think I just think it needs a little more, to be just a little more substantial.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you.
Just maybe a little clarification too on this, on the comment about spacing between the shutters, because the pair of shutters in the middle is actually one piece with the division down the middle. They're not operating separately. So
Oh, they're not.
they are not in the rendering day.
They looked like they
changed it.
looked like they did.
Okay,
Yeah,
my
because when they're
mistake.
closed, they're operating separately. That's what,
Okay.
right.
Okay, that's
Thank you.
been
Yeah,
revised.
thank you. Yeah. Right.
Okay. And I think Commissioner Chen, you weren't here, so I'm going to skip you for the moment. Commissioner Ginsburg?
I agree with Commissioner Bryan's comments, and I would just, and I think this all can be done at staff. For that planted cornice to work, you need to have some drip irrigation set up with it. And so when the staff reviews it, I want to see, I hope they can show that so we don't get the dry summer dead plants. But I think it's approvable.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Goldblum?
Thanks. Bet you $50 that in 3 years they'll either be gone or they'll be plastic. But good luck on the plants. I don't think that's something that I was particularly concerned about. I think I agree with Jeannie in terms of the cornice. And what I would suggest that the applicant do is look at how the boards are detailed at the fascia below the projecting cornice. One of the most striking elements of the existing building, which you can kind of still feel as a shadow in the building next door, was the depth, the height of the vertical surface that the cornice occupied on the facade. And I think one could translate that very nicely in their vocabulary by just varying the width of the board, pushing it out a little bit, having a reveal, something very subtle that would carry that vertical line across. It would help the proportions of the entire top of the building. And it would also be, I think, an appropriate recall of what was there and also tie it in a little bit better to the neighbor. I think that for me, the narrowing of the windows is a good idea, but I don't think you need to leave space. I think you leave the space, I think you're going to lose their concept of the kind of horizontal band that turns magically into punched windows. So I personally think that it'd be fine if they just narrow the proportion of the windows, but let the shutters go full width. I think that the detailing of the entry porch, I think that the columns are fine. Personally, I think that their proportions are correct, but I think that the fascia, the horizontal element above the columns, needs to be deeper, heavier. And I do think that the polycarbonate roof is going to produce an unusual effect. I think that the rendering is not accurate. I think that there will be a kind of modeling, shadowing that'll be rather complex and actually kind of interesting. We saw something like that on Thompson Street a number of years ago when someone was proposing like a corrugated glass canopy. It'll be interesting, I think, and I don't think it'll be inappropriate. So that's it.
Okay, thank you very much, Commissioner Holford-Smith.
I actually think that this is appropriate as presented. But I think that if they listen to some of the comments that have been proposed, working with staff will be fine. I think it's a good project.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, so I think we have a consensus to approve with some adjustments that can be worked out at staff level. So I'll go ahead and make that motion.
Oh, we weren't. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, but did you want to add anything? I'm sorry, I did skip over you for that reason. Okay. And again, I'll note that Commissioner Jefferson is recused on this item. All right. In the matter of docket number 22-07227, 345 Decatur Street in the Bedford-Stuyvesant Expanded Stuyvesant Heights Historic District, a stripped Italianate style row house designed by George H. Pryor and built in 1878 with later alterations. This is an application to alter facades, construct a rooftop addition, and excavate a portion of the rear yard. And I note that the building's facade, plane, scale, and form are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the Bedford-Stuyvesant Expanded Stuyvesant Heights Historic District. And I further note that the streetscape is comprised of a variety of 19th century frame and masonry row houses, many of which were stripped and altered prior to designation. And I recommend approval with modifications, finding that the building was stripped of its architectural details and porch, modified and clad with perma stone, and therefore the proposed work will not eliminate any significant architectural features, that a contemporary design approach to recladding the front facade while maintaining its plain scale and form will lend an element of interest to the streetscape and will not diminish the stylistic unity of the street, given that all of the houses in the row and many others on the block have been altered. That the proposed horizontal wood siding, abstracted cornice element, reintroduction of a front porch, and the tripartite arrangement of the facade will return elements which recall the historic facade and relate well to the adjacent neighbors in the streetscape. That the proposed porch, featuring painted metal posts and beams on a raised base and translucent roofing, includes articulation and shadow lines that sufficiently recall the presence of historic porch elements in a contemporary way. That the projecting metal cornice element at the top of the facade, featuring integral planters, will recall the presence of the missing historic cornice in terms of proportions and shadow line. That the scale of the proposed window openings relate proportionally to the original windows, inclusive of the missing surrounds. So I'm going to actually edit that one a little bit too. That the sliding louvered wood shutters reflect the material scale and proportions of the historic hinge shutters in a modern way. That the opaque screen of the new cedar cladding will recall the finish of the historic painted clapboard siding. That the historic ironwork in front of the house will be retained, tying the areaway of the house to others in the row. That the proposed rooftop addition, featuring fiber cement cladding and punched openings, will not be visible from any public thoroughfare and will be in keeping with other rooftop additions in terms of scale, material, and form. And that the work at the existing rear facade and rear consisting of leveling the roof plane, replacing the modern cladding with new cedar cladding, and redesigning the fenestration will maintain the existing footprint and will retain the scale and character of the building as an individual row house. However, I recommend the applicant continue to work with the staff to study and to reduce the width of the window openings and study their relationship to each other, to continue to think about the height and depth of the cornice, particularly at looking at the fascia board below the projecting element. And in that process, making sure that there is proper drainage. And that the applicant continue to work with the staff on the porch columns and fascia to ensure that they are articulated and wide enough to have a relationship to the row. So, and with that, Commissioner Chen, would you second that motion?
Second.
All right, thank you. John, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Vice Chair Bland.
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin.
Aye.
Commissioner Chen. Aye. Commissioner Ginsburg. Aye. Commissioner Goldblum. Aye. Commissioner Holford Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi.
Aye.
8 in favor and none opposed. The motion passes.
So that's approved. Please continue to work with the staff on those details. All right, and we'll move to the next item.
We'll now move to public meeting item number 5, LPC 24-00959. This is an application for an amendment in the Borough of Manhattan on 1304 lot 7501, 301 Park Avenue, the Waldorf Astoria Hotel, individual and interior landmark. This is an Art Deco style skyscraper and Art Deco combined with modern classical style and Art Deco interiors designed by Schultz and Weaver, built in 1931. The application is to amend certificate of appropriateness 19-37261 to include modifying the balcony railings at the ballroom. Applicants will present after we open the item.
All right, Commissioner Jefferson, would you make a motion to open the proceedings?
So moved.
Thank you. Commissioner Holford Smith, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the applicants may speak.
Okay, can I just, okay, great. Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'm Jonathan Taylor with Higgins and Quaysbar Preservation Consultants on the Waldorf Astoria project since its original approval in 2017. I'm here with Frank Mahan of SOM, who presented the original proposal, and will present a design for replacing non-historic guardrails in the Waldorf's Grand Ballroom. Also here is Laura Ruffner from Building Conservation Associates. BCA has led the painstaking investigation and restoration of interior historic materials and finishes in the designated interiors, including the ballroom. And we're also joined by Chris Schneider of Dodger US, representing building ownership. Just to very briefly introduce the project to commissioners, the Waldorf Astoria is, of course, a renowned historic hotel that has also always had a residential component. The current project centers on converting additional parts of the hotel space to residential use, and it entails a comprehensive rehabilitation of the building exterior and its extensive designated interiors. At the start of the project, these were compromised by a series of unsympathetic alterations over the years, and the project is restoring and carefully adapting the landmark to the use change and other contemporary requirements, including code compliance. The approved work in the ballroom epitomizes this approach, combining significant restoration with ensuring that this multifunctional space is technologically up to date as well as code compliant. The existing non-historic guardrails on the ballroom balconies are an element that require a code upgrade. And Frank is here to present a refined approach that will visually restore the proportion, profile, and finish of the historic railing, while also discreetly providing needed fall protection. Frank.
Careful, careful.
Good afternoon. My name is Frank Mahan. I'm a principal at Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. Some of you probably unfortunately remember spending over 2 hours with me several years ago on this project. I promise to be much, much faster today, much quicker with your time. Nonetheless, we'll set the context, remind you what we talked about in 2017. I know there are a few new faces as well. So as Jonathan mentioned, an individual landmark as well as an interior landmark, spanning a full block on Park Avenue, extensive restoration and design intervention scope, spanning the entire facade. Almost all of the windows, well over 5,000, are being replaced. A portion of those are being enlarged. The entire facade is being cleaned, restored, repaired. There's a number of mechanical system upgrades. Cooling towers, which were visible on Park Avenue, are being moved and relocated, sunken into an open well, so they won't be visible. The pinnacles are being completely restored. There's a new rooftop addition connecting them. They're going to be inhabited for the first time. And then there's a bunch of, work around the ground floor restoration to entrances, restoration to the porte cochere, to marquees, as well as new entrances for the residential component in particular. It's a very large interior landmark as well. Almost all of the designated spaces are captured in this single section spanning from Park Avenue to Lexington Avenue. And that's really one of the quite wonderful things about this building, is the kind of abundance of publicly accessible landmarked spaces. So you can enter at either Park or Lexington, rise up a grand set of stairways, and proceed enfilade through these public spaces at that main level. You can also proceed up to the third floor, where there are a number of meeting spaces, all capped by the grand ballroom, rising from the third to the fifth floor, where we will focus our attention today. And there's a robust program which we've worked in painstaking detail with your staff over a number of years of restoration, as well as design intervention to allow for the adaptive reuse in all of these spaces. So with that 2 hours condensed into 1 minute, we'll focus our attention on a small detail in the grand ballroom. Very important nonetheless. So we have excerpted 3 slides here directly from that 2017 public hearing introducing the ballroom. And as we can see in this original photo and these drawings in the senior designer's own hand, The space was grandly proportioned, relatively simple, modern space with targeted areas of decorative intent, decoration. We see lighting was very important in this space, and there was this idea that the ceiling was quite bright, and through that bright ceiling indirectly illuminated the space below. The space nonetheless has undergone a number of renovations, significant alterations over its nearly 100-year life. In the early 60s, it was brought quite far away from its original design aesthetic intent, with different colored walls, different materials, really a very significant alteration. In the early 80s, it was returned to a kind of interpretation of the original intent, but upon deeper investigation, many of these materials are not original, or they're approximations, not exactly what was originally there. And in particular, we see a number of attempted fixes for the lighting. Most significantly, this enormous chandelier affixed unceremoniously to the center of the wonderful medallion at the center. And in 2017, we addressed this space with these diagrams indicating areas of restoration, areas of preservation, and areas of update. And we see that there are a series of guardrails noted as requiring update for code compliance. Those guardrails are at the 4th and 5th levels, indicated in red here at the balconies, at the edges of the balconies, of course. And we only have photographic documentation of their original condition. There are no drawings. And so from this photograph taken shortly after their opening, we can surmise that they were relatively low, based on the comparison to tabletop heights, as well as the gentlemen standing there. We think they were about 30 inches in height. They appear to be circular in section, about 1.5 inches in diameter. And we surmise that they were a white metal based on the brightness, but also on the color selection, the color palette in the rest of the room. In 2017, when we were here, those guardrails were no longer extant. They had been replaced by bronze guardrails with much more robust uprights, surmounted by a very large cap wrapped in red velvet. So much more visually prominent and present than the original condition. Curiously, however, still not code compliant. So what we're looking for is a height of 3'6", so 42 inches above the walking surface, as well as opening no larger than 4 inches in diameter. So those are the criteria to which we are solving. And so our proposal simply is to restore the aesthetic intent of those guardrails, which were rather utilitarian in nature compared to the more heavily decorated balcony front below them, and to affix a vertically cantilevered piece of laminated low iron glass set 2 inches behind those guardrails, which will extend to the required 3'6" of the walking surface, as well as solve for the 4-inch diameter issue. The guardrail is proposed to be stainless steel lacquered to match nickel silver. That coloration is consistent with metals we find in other spaces throughout the hotel, as well as the silver leaf, which is lacquered in the grand ballroom, matches that coloration. We're using stainless steel lacquered here for its durability and availability. The glass is low iron, as I mentioned, so that it is color neutral as possible. The top edge will remain exposed. It will not be capped with another piece of metal, which would introduce another horizontal line. So seen another way, a comparison of the original condition, the existing condition on the right, the more visually obstructive, obtrusive guardrail, and the proposal on the right restoring the aesthetic intent while introducing the new piece of glass, seen again in the section with the original, existing, and proposed. And yet again, in renderings and images, again, the image that we have, the existing condition and the proposal on the right side. A couple of details just to note, there are a couple of instances at the 4th floor 3, in fact, where the profile of the balcony is curved in plan, and we just wanted to include this to indicate explicitly that we will be using curved glass that matches those curves. It will not be faceted. And at the 5th floor, there are many more of these curved balcony profiles. They as well will utilize true curved glass. One more detail of note, at the 4th floor, so the lower of the 2 balcony levels, there are 7 locations featuring 2 pair of uplights. These uplights will be affixed to the guardrail. They'll be the same diameter, 1.5 inches, circular as the guardrail, same finish. And those uplight the medallion at the center, supporting that original intent of a brightly illuminated ceiling. And finally, we have incorporated this new design proposal into an updated rendering, illustrating the effect of these guardrails, restoring the aesthetic intent, something that is secondary to the more decorative balcony fronts below, and how that will harmonize with the entire space. Some of the other work, that's going on here is restoration of stone, of plaster work, of paint, of silver leaf and with a glaze. The ceiling itself, its profile, its actual shape is being changed, again, to reinforce that sense of lighting. All the grill work and stonework is being restored as well. And so this is the final piece that we want to pass by all of it.
Where are those little sconces going?
They are at the 7th floor, and there are 4th floor, there are 7 locations. There, and then the corner.
So you can't really see them in the rendering.
They're too small.
Thanks.
And they allow you to remove the modern chandelier and restore the ceiling.
Very important to us.
Okay. All right. Any other questions, Commissioner Holford Smith?
You mentioned that the glass is low iron. Is it also non-reflective?
Well, it's a standard low iron glass, which is as as color neutral and as low reflectivity as we can possibly get.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Yeah, could you go back to the image of the booth itself? Go back to the image of the booth itself. When I'm sitting, I'm looking through glass essentially. And how many layers, how many seats do I have that I'm looking through the glass?
So it's a piece of laminated glass, which means there are 2 lights with interlayer, or essentially glues those 2 pieces of glass together. But it reads just as one sheet.
No, that's what I'm asking. I'm in the theater looking out.
Yes.
And there's a piece of glass. There are 2 rows, right, or 3. There are 2 rows looking out, and I'm looking out.
It's all flat. The floor is flat behind them, and it could be set up in any number of ways.
So
it
people
could be shots off the dining table.
So we're always looking through glass.
Right. We have 2 commissioners who are on Zoom, and they can only hear you if you speak into the mic. So just try to repeat the answer to that question.
So we're using laminated glass, which has 2 lights with an interlayer attaching them together. The question is, would you look through the glass when you're seated? The answer is yes. However, the consideration is, if you didn't use glass, this would mean a series of additional rails, solid metal rails, to meet the 4-inch requirement, further occluding your views down to the stage or of the balconies themselves from the center of the room.
Great. Any other questions? All right. I don't see any other questions, so I think we can move to our discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So some of us do remember the designation and then the subsequent applications for the incredible work to adaptively reuse this space. And so this is an amendment to those previous approvals to address this railing, which is currently non-historic and non-code compliant. And the proposal is to replicate the historic railing based on photographic images and with a non-reflective and low iron glass behind it to achieve the 4-inch requirements that would be, and the height that would be required by code. So we'll begin our discussion. Commissioner Chen, would you like to start this one?
Yeah, it's a long time coming. I'm so glad that it's not a 2-hour presentation. I'll just say, but I think this is very appropriate, and we can't wait to see the plan assessing the space.
Commissioner Ginsburg.
This is a hard problem of how you keep this the walk and meet the code, and I think this is as good a solution as you could get. It appropriate.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Goldblum.
I agree. I think it's interesting in that it raises a lot of kind of non-landmarks issues. Like Everardo was saying, the acoustical quality of being on those balconies will be completely changed by this. But I'm assuming that there is some kind of AV, super fancy AV system that's going to kind of make up for that. I also am kind of curious about the reflective effect of curved laminated glass. And I'm educated by the applicant that low iron equals low reflection, which I didn't know. I presume that that's true. I would certainly trust the staff to make sure that that is the case. But I think it's an interesting question as to whether we've struggled here many times with the glass railings as not really being as invisible as everyone wishes them to be. And here the whole game is relying on that being in fact true. But because of the curve and the prominence, I do have concerns. I would suggest that the applicant, in the ideal world, the applicant would show a mock-up to the staff. But I'm not sure that I would require that.
Okay, Commissioner Halford Smith.
I think I would require a mock-up. From my experience, low iron does not equal non-reflective, and the non-reflective is usually a coating that's added to the glass. So I don't want to,
Okay. So just
mention what the applicant said about the low reflectivity. I think that the staff should just work with the applicant to make sure that it's not reflective, and especially at the curved portions, which are much more difficult.
Okay, Commissioner Jefferson.
The best solution for that particular functional problem.
Okay, Commissioner Lutfi.
Yeah, I think they did. It's a little bit of a balancing act, right? You're trying to bring something back to the historical condition as closely as possible, which you do with the design, but then you have code. And then you have to, of course, make changes and tweak things appropriately. And I think you've done a really good job. It's so much cleaner and more elegant, and getting rid of the chandelier and installing the small lighting. It works very, very well.
Thank you, Vice Chair Bland.
Agreed. I think this is a very a good solution. Not that there are many other good solutions. I think all of the others that the architect mentioned would be not as preferable. So altogether appropriate in my judgment.
Thank you. And Commissioner Chapin.
Yeah, I just want to first actually thank the owners. They have been done a terrific job so far working on this building, interior and exterior, and working very well with the Landmarks Commission, which not every owner does. So I just want to express my appreciation for that. And I do think this is, the best solution in the circumstances. And I'm sure if things work out that the glass does not work well, that a change will be made in the future, and we'll see it again if necessary. But I think this seems reasonable to try, and yes, a mock-up would be desirable to see for their benefit, to see if it, and ours, to see if it works well. But I can certainly approve this as presented.
Okay, thank you very much. And I agree. I think this has a lot of advantages going toward the restoration of the railing, which is a relatively small feature in this otherwise large room, but I think it also just really contributes to the restoration of the entire space by allowing the roof to be restored and lit a different way. I do think, given the 4-inch spacing, that any of the other alternatives, I think, would be more dense. So I think the glass probably will be the lightest touch, but we can certainly work with you to see a mock-up along the way. So we'll go ahead and approve it today, and we'll continue to work with you and look at a mock-up in the field. So Commissioner Chen, would you be able to make the motion?
I don't need to make the condition of the mock-up.
Well, we can say at the end that it'll be conditioned upon the staff's review of a mock-up.
In the matter of LPC 24-00959, 301 Park Avenue, Waldorf Astoria Hotel, individual and interior landmark. The application is to amend certificate of appropriateness 19-37261 to include modifying the balcony railings at the ballroom. I recommend approval, finding that the removal of non-historic railings will not damage or eliminate any significant architectural features of the ballroom, that the proposed metal railing will recall the historic railings in terms of finish, height, material, and details, and that the frameless glass attached to the rail postings will be clear and simply designed and set behind the metal railings on the balcony side, and therefore will have a discrete presence while meeting code requirements, that the proposed light fixtures will be small in size and installed only at the 4th floor level balcony railings and only be seen at a distance, resulting in discrete installation, and that the proposed work will not detract from the special architectural and historic character of this interior landmark. I do recommend that the applicant submit a mock-up and work with staff closely on this important detail.
Great, thank you. And Commissioner Ginsburg, would you second that motion?
Second.
And John, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Vice Chair Brand.
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin.
Aye.
Commissioner Chen.
Aye.
Commissioner Ginsburg. Aye. Commissioner Goldblum.
Aye.
Commissioner Holford Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson.
Aye.
Commissioner Lutfi.
Aye.
9 in favor, none opposed, the motion passes.
That's approved. Thank you. Thank you. And we're going to now go back to an earlier item. Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to return to public hearing item number 2. This was LPC 24-00822, application for certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, block 1264, lot 5, 1 Rockefeller Plaza, originally Time and Life Building, individual landmark. I'll just repeat this again, but this is an Art Deco style office tower designed by a consortium of architects known as the Associated Architects, with portions designed by a group of fine artists, built in 1936 to 37. And the application is to renew the temporary installation of an outdoor seating enclosure. This was presented earlier today. We can have a brief summary if we'd like to do that to start.
So this is one where we didn't have a quorum in person. And so we'll ask you to just briefly summarize the presentation you gave this morning, and Commissioner Goldblum is recused.
Of course. I'll just run back to one slide that I think will wrap up nicely.
Okay, so as you mentioned, this is a proposal to extend the approval for this fabric enclosure at the base of 1 Rockefeller Plaza at the southeast corner of West 49th Street and Rockefeller Plaza, across the street from the Sunken Plaza corner from 30 Rock. This enclosure was permitted under a temporary approval permit with Landmark staff during COVID to account for operational needs for the restaurant at that time. And over the course of time has continued to be necessary for the changing needs as we have transitioned through the COVID, through the pandemic and out of the pandemic. And so additional time is needed with this enclosure. There's limited interior seating and the exterior enclosure leaves or provides most of the seating for this restaurant. A couple of the key points that we discussed previously, that this is a truly reversible installation. The enclosure is not mounted, physically attached to any piece of the building, the paving, the planters, none of it. It's freestanding. It's held in place by steel plates that actually fit underneath and are hidden by the movable planters on casters in the area. It is occupying a small portion of the building's frontage. The building has 405 feet of frontage and the enclosure occupies just 45 feet of that on West 49th Street. It's diminutive in scale to the building and the surrounding buildings. The height and overall composition of it allows for a continued reading of the base of the building, the storefront rhythm, and the continuation of the limestone piers. All of the primary entrances to the building with their beautiful artwork, their monumental artwork, remain in a sense of prominence, unaffected by the enclosure. Overall, it just fits within the streetscape compared to the 36-story tower that it sits at the base of and is across from the 70-story 30 Rockefeller Plaza, and also fronts on the side to Rockefeller Plaza itself, which is a very busy and active thoroughfare in terms of visitors to the center and retail and restaurant goers. It is finished and dimensioned to be recessive and deferential. So the coloring blends with the overall appearance of the storefronts and kind of differs to that composition of the base of the building. I think that does it, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have as part of our recap.
Okay, thank you very much. Any additional questions? Okay. All right. Thank you for summarizing that. And as we said earlier, as I described, the staff is under the rules authorized to approve temporary installations for up to a year. And the criteria sorry, Commissioner Chapin, thank you very much. Did you have a question?
Yeah, it was just that, there are new regulations for street enclosures, and I assume this will be working with anything that affects them.
So this is, as I understand it, all private property. So it does the planning around open restaurants, open streets and restaurants is actually doesn't apply to Rockefeller Center and the Plaza because it's private property.
Yeah, that's what I was curious about. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So again, the staff rules set up criteria for the staff to approve temporary installations that don't address appropriateness. They really about the temporary nature of it. So the questions of whether the installation is easily reversible and whether there's a plan and time schedule for the removal and any necessary repair. And so that the staff, because they found it wasn't attached to the building and there was a plan and time schedule where they were able to approve it, given the sort of struggles of the businesses during this sort of coming out of the pandemic, the applicant is asking to extend the temporary duration of the temporary installation to 6 years. And because they're asking for additional time, they have also presented a narrative for why they believe this is appropriate in this context, given the size of the building, the size of the complex, the relationship of this fabric enclosure to the storefronts and the entries and the plaza itself. So we'll begin our discussion. Commissioner Lutfi, would you like to start this one?
Sure. I'm glad you left this slide up. I wish it was a little brighter, but because I think it really does a good job of showing how this restaurant, the structure fits within the context. And it's kind of perfectly situated in a way, and you have a lot of things going for you. First of all, the building's big. This is very small, but the deep sidewalk really enabled you to place this structure there without feeling like it's crowding the street. And you can see that with the pedestrians walking by. It almost looks like that's a normal width of the sidewalk that they're walking on, doesn't get it in the way. By the same token, you're defining the space very nicely with this mix of permanent and removable and movable plant beds, which is very nice. And then it is tied very well from a look and feel standpoint into the, what's just beyond it with the storefronts, the colors, the color of the typeface. So it blends very nicely. And I think it's a job well done. And I think earlier there had been a question by Commissioner Ginsburg about could we, make this conditional if the restaurant closed, and that if we approve, then the deal's off. And I think that was a good recommendation. I would support that as well.
Okay, great. And I think it does sort of fit within the sidewalk space the way you described, because that space is already defined by those planters and it's sort of nestled within those planters. So it doesn't intrude further into the sidewalk. Commissioner Chen?
Yeah, I'm in agreement in context of the Rockefeller space, and I think is the deep sidewalk, the planters, and that it is diminutive compared to the scale of the 30 Rock and all the surrounding this gorgeous piece of urban architecture. So I can find that appropriate.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Ginsburg.
I agree, totally appropriate. Commissioner Lutfi added the one comment I had.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Holford Smith.
I agree. I think it's appropriate.
Okay, and Commissioner Jefferson. Vice Chair Bland.
Quite appropriate to Rockefeller Center. I just wish that the plethora of sidewalk, and street sheds that have been erected for COVID would have half the degree of design integrity that this does. It's really very nice.
Thank you. And Commissioner Chapin.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Commissioner Lutfi had to say, and I can approve it.
Okay. All right. So I think we have a consensus to approve, and it'll be contingent upon it being for this particular tenant. Okay. Should that tenancy change, you're welcome to come back to us.
In the matter of docket 24-00822 1 Rockefeller Plaza, aka 1-15 Rockefeller Plaza, 15-19 West 48th Street, 14-20 West 49th Street, 1 Rockefeller Plaza, originally Time and Life Building, individual landmark. I recommend approval, finding that the proposed installation does not include any mechanical attachments to the limestone facade or sidewalk pavement and uses existing electrical outlets and therefore is essentially easily reversible, that the enclosure is located away from the primary building entrances, the sunken plaza, and other design focal points of the Rockefeller Center individual landmark and is contained within a setback area at the building base, resulting in a subordinate presence. That the top of the enclosure is lower than the storefront sign bands, thereby retaining some legibility of the regular storefront bay rhythm at the building base. That the dark color of the enclosure and existing screening with permanent and movable planters further helps the enclosure to recede from view and differentiates it as a secondary to the original limestone building. And that the Rockefeller Center historically and currently features short-term seasonal structures and artwork supporting activation of the public spaces. Therefore, installation of some form of temporary structure is with the practice. I recommend, however, should the restaurant close, then the applicant will have the opportunity to come back to us again with another proposal.
All right, thank you. And Commissioner Ginsburg, would you second that motion?
Second.
And John, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll.
Aye.
Vice Chair Bland.
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin.
Aye.
Commissioner Chen. Aye. Commissioner Ginsburg. Aye. Commissioner Goldblum. I'm sorry. Commissioner Holford Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson. Aye. Commissioner Lutfi.
Aye.
The motion passes 9 in favor, 9 opposed.
That's approved. Thank you. Move to the next and final item.
Right, that's public meeting item number 6. LPC 23-11109, an application for a certificate of appropriateness in the Borough of Manhattan, block 1523, lot 72, 1209 Park Avenue in the expanded Carnegie Hill Historic District. This is a converted 19th century row house with a modern style facade designed by Lucian David and altered in 1960. The application is to reclad the front facade, replace the rear facade, and construct rooftop and rear yard additions. This was last presented at the public hearing of June 27th, 2023, and no action was taken at that time. The applicants will present their revisions to the proposal after we open the proceedings.
Okay, so Commissioner Chen, would you make a motion to open the proceedings?
So
Thank you. Commissioner Holford Smith, would you second that motion?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the applicants may present.
Okay, commissioners, the applicants have entered the hearing via Zoom. Jackie, please state your name for the record and you may begin.
Hello again, commissioners and landmark staff. Thank you for hearing this application today, 1209 Park Avenue. As Corey stated, you last saw this at the public hearing of June 27th. Commissioners asked that the design of the front facade be restudied and that the massing of the rear addition be broken up and its window to masonry proportions be reconsidered. With that, I'd like to introduce the architect, Jose Ramirez of JL Ramirez Architect, to take you through the design changes.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Thank you for allowing us to present our redesign of 1209 Park Avenue. We presented 1209 Park Avenue on June 27th and received constructive comments regarding the design of the front facade and concerns regarding the rear facade from several commissioners. There is one distinction of this facade that is not common in the Carnegie Hill or Upper East Side Historic District, and that is the fact that the facade is stepped. We could not find any other precedent for this facade in the district, so this facade is unique in that sense. The stepping changes the proportions of the facade. The building takes on a more of a vertical appearance versus a wide across appearance that is typical of 20-foot plus wide townhouses. Next slide, please. For inspiration, we took the constructive comments mentioned by several commissioners and drew inspiration from two buildings, 1145 Park Avenue in the middle, which is the middle photo, and 1149 Park Avenue on the right, both in the district. Our client also expressed a desire for a realistic classical design. We drew inspiration from these facades and embarked on redesigning our building. The next slide. In this slide, you see the three facades.
the existing facade on the left, the June 27th facade, proposed facade, and the current redesigned facade on the right. Next slide. In this slide, we have a comparison between the existing condition facade and our redesigned facade. Next slide. In this slide, you're viewing the redesigned facade details. The building would be clad in limestone, and we'll go over that in the next few slides. Next slide, number 6. In this slide, we have the June 27th facade and the redesigned facade, both in context. Next slide. In this slide, we have the visuals of the exterior finished materials, and I'll get that in a little bit into the next slide. Next slide, please. In this slide, we have the renderings of the June 27th facade and our redesigned facade. The redesigned front will be clad in Indiana limestone with a subtle inset in the center, creating a minimalist interpretation of a classical design. The building has a base, middle, and top invoking common proportions of classical townhouses. The base will be made of flame hammered Indiana limestone, and detail will be more robust to give it an appearance of a rusticated base. The middle is inspired by classical proportions with accentuated pilasters. Inset in the center, a capital and base offering the same classical proportions. The upper band of the middle is reminiscent of an entablature. The upper story, typically called the attic story, creates a top to the building, completing the design. The cornice returns are captured by vertical insets at the outside corners, a typical detail seen in classical townhouses. Every single joint line is carefully placed horizontally to accentuate the classical inspiration and contrast the vertical nature of the building. The window openings and proportions will remain in the current locations due to the window heads being tight to the existing floors. We're not moving the floors in the building, but we feel that this is not a detriment to the design. Can you go back to slide 2, please? Inspiration. I just want to go back to slide 2. And in this slide, you can see the proportions of the building, the clean design, especially the center where you have the windows, the insets, the attic story. So we drew a lot of inspiration from this building. Jackie, back to 8, please. As you can see, again, we have the issue with the fact that the building is stepped, which does not allow us to carry that broad facade across, which is reminiscent of a lot of townhouses in the city. LPC 9 and 10, the next few slides, you can see the facade in different angles, and here you can see the projection on the left with the inset on the right. Next slide. Just the different views of the townhouse. Again, you can see the inset. We'll have the area way at the bottom also with a gate and entry. Yeah, next slide. Okay, the rear. There was concern voiced by several commissioners that the rear facade needed work and that the scale needed to be reduced. The arrangement and proportion of the windows was also discussed. To address the concerns of the bulk, we set back the rear wall of the roof addition to reduce the overall height, as you can see in this slide. We also reduced the height of addition by 2 feet, the rooftop addition by 2 feet. Next slide, please. In this slide, you're viewing the development of the rear facade. We set back the roof addition by 3 feet, as I just said, creating a step facade. We also lowered the roof of the addition by 2 feet. The top floor is also finished in stucco to give the addition a lighter appearance, which is the one on the right. Several commissioners mentioned changing the rear window treatment. We revised the windows in the rear to accommodate a 3-across fenestration, reminiscent of typical brick townhouses. We also created a hierarchy by reducing the height of the windows as the building height increases. The jack arches above the windows are brick with limestone sills. With these changes, we feel that we have reduced the impact of the rear addition. Next slide. Here you can see the existing condition on top, proposed June 27th addition, and the bottom one is the setback, reducing the bulk of the addition. Next slide, please. Okay, here are just floor plans showing in red showing the reduction. Next slide. Again, this is just another section showing the existing condition and old proposed June 27th addition, reduced addition. Next slide. Okay, here you have a comparison between the June 27th proposal and the current proposal, both in context.
Next slide. Rendering, here we see a rendering of the comparison. June 27 proposal on the left, new proposal on the right, and here you can see the hierarchy of windows, the reduction in bulk, and the setback to the top floor addition. This addition has also been reduced by 2 feet. Next slide. Here you see the rear addition, axonometric in different viewpoints. In closing, given the step facade constraints, we feel that our classically inspired front facade has the same level of elegance, simplicity, minimalism, proportions evident in our inspirational buildings. As far as the rear is concerned, we feel that the massing adjustment, height reduction, redesigned fenestration, material change address the concern expressed by the commissioners during the June 27th presentation. I welcome your feedback.
All right, thank you very much. Do we have any questions, Commissioner Goldblum?
Yeah, the lines that you show on the front facade for the joints, are those reveals? Are those flush? How are those treated?
Okay, so it's a masonry building and it will have, obviously there'll be block work and stonework involved. We intend to accentuate those lines. If you look at it closely, the proportions of the side and the top of those windows evoke a column and an entablature. Those reveals will be slightly accentuated thicker than a normal joint line, so you can actually read the horizontal joints, evoking a classical design, classical proportion. So they will be thicker than a normal masonry joint line.
Thicker and
slightly thicker
with like a reveal?
Slight reveal, 3/8, a little thicker than 3/8 a joint.
And then in between those, let's say for your larger vertical panels, there will be individual pieces that'll be shown that will have a kind of a normal joint, or that's just one big panel?
No, well, we'd love to do a panel, given a larger panel, but given the budget constraint, perhaps it will be broken down into a normal masonry. We intend to keep the pilasters on the side as one horizontal piece with a tighter joint, and then accentuate the larger joints to accentuate the horizontals as reveals. That is the intent.
Got it. Thanks.
All right, any other questions? All right, not seeing any other questions, I think we can move to our discussion. So thank you. And so this was another project that we saw recently. And I think at that hearing, most commissioners were comfortable with a redesign of the front facade, except that I think there was a common thought that as it was designed, it really didn't reflect truthfully the classically inspired facades of the historic district that it was trying to relate to. And so suggested that that design and the details be restudied. And we also asked that the design of the rear facade be restudied to better relate to a row house character. The applicant has changed the fenestration to a 3-bay fenestration pattern. And I think almost everybody asked for the rooftop addition to be set back from the rear facade to retain a sense of the row house volume, but without increasing visibility from the street. So, and I just want to confirm that the visibility hasn't changed from the street since the last time we saw it. Okay. All right. So we'll begin our discussion. Commissioner Goldblum, would you like to start this one?
Sure. Night and day. I think that this is an approvable project. I think the design has what it didn't have last time, which is a sense of place, a sense of detail, a logic and proportion, and a meaningful engagement with the district. I think it's wonderful. I think that the applicant should make sure as the project develops that they work with the staff on the jointing of the stone, because I think that looking at the examples, the stone jointing makes a big difference, and they ought to kind of consider that, because it can really alter this and turn what is a reasonable, appropriate design into something of a mishmash. So, I mean, I think it'd be great if they could do it in big panels like this, but that might have a cost implication that the client might not like. So, I think the back is a total home run and fits well within the district.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And just before we go on, I don't want to neglect this, but as you all know, we did also receive letters from Carnegie Hill Neighbors Historic District and Historic Districts Council, and 12 of the neighbors. And those, again, were shared in advance of today's public meeting. Commissioner Holford Smith.
I agree with Commissioner Goldblum. I think this is much improved. I think the proportions are much better. And I definitely agree that the details will be very important to look at those, the staff to review those joint details. I think the back looks great and I think it's provable.
Great. Thank you. Commissioner Jefferson.
I also agree that it's much to improve. The only issue that bothers me is the entry door. I wish there was an entry elaboration on that, because it really put up the setback. It's really set back, and it should have more presence. I think the back facade it works well. I think the roof addition is appropriate and works. I just wish it wasn't covering other people's windows, but if there was a way that you could carve out, maybe not. But I think it's much improved.
Okay, thank you.
Appropriate now.
Commissioner Ledford.
I'm in agreement with my fellow commissioners. In looking at it from this view, you feel like it's been within the streetscape for a while, even though it's, not an original building. And I think it's much cleaner, clean and simple, and you did all the right setbacks. And I would like to say, in addition to the recommendations about working with staff on the joints, I think Everardo's comment is very well taken, because I think I was so happy to see the rest of the building front and back that I wasn't paying attention to the entryway. And I think you're right, Everardo, that it's like you almost can't tell what's going on there. And I think it probably needs a little more detailing that the staff can help with.
Okay. Commissioner Chen.
We're in agreement. It's much improved over last time.
Commissioner Ginsburg.
In agreement, much improved, approvable.
Vice Chair Bland.
Michael said it, night and day. This is a metamorphosis, and we've ended up with a very approvable scheme. Both the front and the back, I think, are quite nice, and I approve them.
Okay. Commissioner Chapin.
Yeah, they've been, I think, very responsive in a very positive way to our comments, and I think it's very successful in general, and I can approve it.
Okay, great. So I think we have a consensus, and we'll to approve it, and we'll ask you to work with the staff on the detailing, the careful detailing, and to look at the detailing around the entry to make that a little more prominent. So Commissioner Goldblum, would you be able to do that?
Sure.
Great.
Regarding 1209 Park Avenue and the expanded Carnegie Hill Historic District, the application is to reclad the front facade, replace the rear facade, and construct rooftop and rear yard additions. I note that the building's style, scale, materials, and details are among the features that contribute to the special architectural and historic character of the expanded Carnegie Hill Historic District. I recommend approval, finding that the character-defining features of the house's original Renaissance Revival Queen Anne style were lost prior to designation of the historic district, and the existing mid-20th century alterations are not unique or representative of exceptional details or craftsmanship. Therefore, the work will not eliminate a significant later alteration. That the proposed redesign is in keeping with long tradition of altering and replacing earlier facades with new facades on the Upper East Side. That the contemporary design of the front facade, which is being reclad only and will retain the existing form and openings, will better relate to the streetscape and historic district in the existing condition by introducing interpretive detailing and articulation in the composition that expresses the base, middle, and top of the building. That the limestone cladding and trim, granite water table, and painted wood windows and door will be harmonious with the variety and character of materials and finishes throughout the streetscape. But the area way ironwork is simple and designed will have a neutral presence in the streetscape, that the rear addition will not project into the rear yard beyond the existing L. And therefore, will diminish the central green space Well, the design and materiality of the rear addition featuring brick cladding punched openings at the upper floors, larger masonry openings at the lower floors, multi-wide windows will be in keeping with the character of rear facades of the block. But the rooftop addition will be set back from the rear facade, thereby requiring historic row house massing. The rooftop addition will not be visible over the primary facade from Park Avenue, will only be visible from limited vantage points on East 95th Street, and will not overwhelm the building or the streetscape, and that the work will not detract from the historic and architectural character of the expanded Carnegie Hill Historic District, and the applicant will work with staff on the jointing and detailing of the front facade masonry, limestone, and they will work with the staff to enhance the entry portal design.
Thank you. And Commissioner Jefferson, would you second that motion?
So second.
John, will you call the vote?
Chair Carroll,
Aye.
Vice Chair Bland,
Aye.
Commissioner Chapin,
Aye.
Commissioner Chen. Aye. Commissioner Ginsburg. Aye. Commissioner Holford Smith.
Aye.
Commissioner Jefferson. Aye. Commissioner Lutfi.
Aye.
9 in favor, none opposed. The motion passes.
All right,
Thank you,
that's approved.
Commissioners.
Oops.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
you. And that concludes our day. So again, I'd like to thank everybody and mostly all of you commissioners for coming here and giving your time. Thank you, Commissioner Holford Smith, for making it in so that we could manage the quorum issues. And a special thank you to Vice Chair Bland and Commissioner Chapin for joining us remotely from your vacations. Have a wonderful break and we'll see everybody in September. Thank you.
Thank you.
See you in September. We have some 2 hours.